Hello ladies, this is Barbara Chapmond, Hondo, Texas, coming back to you with an audio today on Cowgirls Get Going for God. www.wow-womenofword.com, and we're here to share a summary of the books of the Bible. This is an audio today and it's found on the YouTube, it's found on our website, and we're trying to just promote God's Word out there. And this is an audio and we're going to be briefly sharing with you what each book of the Bible is all about. So we're going to try to do this, and hopefully it's not going to be too monotone. You can stay with it. It's just a summary reference for you so you know what each one of the books are about. And these notes, I found this in the Believer's Bible Commentary. That is an awesome resource when you're studying God's Word. That's the Believer's Bible Commentary. And there's also Matthew Henry. There's a lot of resources out there on the website and online, so check it out. But we're going to briefly go over this today. We have about 7 minutes on this audio. And as I described before, it takes probably several hours just to get this little bitty 7-minute audio out there on the YouTube and on the website. But it's a blessing, and let's get started. It says the first 5 books are telling of Jewish race and culture. So Genesis, very briefly, describes creation, the first rebellion against God, God choosing of Abraham and his family, and God's people, the Israelites. Okay, that's a brief summary of Genesis. And then Exodus talks about God rescued the Israelites from slavery in Egypt, and he gives Moses the 10 Commandments. And Leviticus is where God sets up laws for Israelites. And the Numbers, because of their rebellion and disobedience, the Israelites had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years before entering the Promised Land. And then Deuteronomy is just before his death. Moses made 3 emotional farewell speeches recalling the history of the Israelites. And then these are the history books, and the history books are Joshua, and that's after Moses' death. Joshua commanded the armies that conquered much of the territory in the promised land of Canaan. And then we have Judges. Judges is talking about the new nation that had a series of failures and how God established leaders and called judges to help them bring them back, help bring the people back to God. And then Ruth is a story of love and loyalty between 2 widows that shines out brightly in an otherwise dark time of history. And then 1 Samuel, Samuel became a leader between the time of Judges and Kings, and he appoints Israel's first kings. After his own failure, Saul tried to prevent God's next king and David from taking the throne. And then we have in 2 Samuel where David, a man after God's own heart, you hear that a lot, he brought the nation together. But after committing adultery and murder, he suffered family and national failures. And then in 1 Kings, we have Solomon, who became the next king. And then in 2 Kings, this book continues to record the rulers of the kingdom in 1 Kings. And then we have 1 Chronicles. This book opens with the most complete genealogy record of the Bible, and then adds more events of David. And then 2 Chronicles is familiar with 1 and 2 Kings. And Ezra is, after being held captive in the Babylon for decades, the Jews are allowed to return to their homeland. And then Nehemiah returns to the Babylonian captivity after the temple had been rebuilt, and he consecrated and worked on restoring the protective wall around Jerusalem. Okay, that's what Nehemiah did. And then we have Esther, and that is a story set among captive Jews in Persia. A courageous Jewish queen stopped a plan to exterminate her people. She had the favor of God. And we are blessed and highly favored from God when we're walking in His ways. And these are books of poetry. These are called the books of poetry, and they are Isaiah, which is Isaiah looked into the failures of all the nations around him and pointed to the future Messiah, Jesus. And then Jeremiah. These 2 books are awesome. Jeremiah had many bad things happen to him, yet he held his stern message that the people needed to turn back to God. And then we have Lamentations, which is all Jeremiah's warnings about Jerusalem came true. And Ezekiel is talking about, he often used some dramatic stories and sometimes acted out illustrations to make points in his book. And then Daniel's a really good one that talks a lot about end times, that you'll see Daniel in Revelations saying some of the same things. And although Daniel was captive in Babylon, Daniel became prime minister in the government, And Daniel lived a life of obedience, even when he was faced with pressure from others. And that's what God's Word helps you and I to do. Hosea lived out his message. Israel had been spiritually unfaithful to God. Joel is the beginning of a recent plague of locusts in Judah, which Joel foretold, and God's judgment on Judah. And then Amos preached to Israel during a time of prosperity. And Obadiah preached warnings to Edom, a nation which was bordering Judah. And then Micah exposed corruption at every level of society. But he ended his book with a promise of forgiveness and restoration for God's people. And then Nahum, long after Jonah had preached in Nineveh and the people had turned to God, Nahum foretold the mighty city's total destruction. And then in Haggai, this is talking about Haggai reminded the Jews to put God first. And then Zechariah also urged the Jews to work in and on the temple. He used a more encouraging approach, describing how the temple would point to the coming Messiah, Jesus. So here we're talking again, the Old Testament foretelling about Jesus coming. And then Malachi is the last book in the Old Testament, and it is faced a nation that had grown indifferent to God, and he sought to stir them up and turn them back to God. So you see a lot of these Old Testament scriptures where the prophets are continually trying to get the people to turn back to God. So we're going to stop here, and the next audio is going to be a summary of the New Testament books. The next summary, so come back and you'll hear the final of this audio on the summary of the books of the Bible. God bless you, cowgirls.